The crystal chandelier cast a harsh light over the private dining room at the exclusive restaurant in downtown Atlanta. The clinking of heavy silver forks against fine china stopped, and the room went completely silent. Isaiah stood at the end of the long mahogany table, holding a small, wrapped box in his calloused hands. He wore a faded charcoal suit, the fabric worn thin at the elbows, standing out like a stain among the sea of custom tuxedos and designer evening gowns. "What is this, old man?" Marcus asked, his voice dripping with loud theatrical disgust. Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, swirling a glass of $200 scotch. He wore a silk suit that caught the light, a heavy gold watch gleaming on his wrist. Isaiah did not flinch, and he extended the small box forward. "It is for your anniversary," Isaiah said, keeping his voice steady and calm. Marcus let out a sharp laugh, a sound that echoed off the expensive wood-paneled walls. He did not reach for the gift. Instead, he snapped his fingers, and a waiter immediately stepped forward to take the small box from Isaiah. "Open it," Marcus commanded the waiter, a cruel smile playing on his lips. The waiter carefully peeled back the simple brown paper, revealing a hand-carved wooden clock. Isaiah had spent 3 weeks carving that clock, sanding the oak down until it was smooth as glass, a testament to time and patience. But Marcus looked at it as if it were trash pulled from a dumpster. "A wooden clock," Marcus announced to the room, shaking his head in exaggerated disbelief. "My wife and I just celebrated 4 years of marriage, and her father brings us a piece of scrap wood." A few of the wealthy friends chuckled, sipping their expensive wine, enjoying the public humiliation. Kendra sat next to Marcus, her eyes downcast, her shoulders tense in her silk dress. She did not look up at her father. She did not say a word to defend him. Isaiah felt a familiar ache in his chest, but he kept his face perfectly blank. "You see this watch on my wrist?" Marcus asked, holding up his arm for the entire room to admire. "This is a custom gold piece, Isaiah. It costs more than that beat-up truck you drove here in. It costs more than the little house you live in. We do not need your little craft projects. We live in a different world now, old man." Isaiah stood perfectly still, his posture straight, absorbing the insult. He noticed the way Marcus gripped the Scotch glass, the slight tremor of desperation beneath the arrogant swagger. He noticed the aggressive posturing, the need to belittle a quiet man, just to feel large in a room full of expensive suits. This was not the behavior of a truly wealthy man. This was the performance of a man drowning in his own ego. "I made it with my own hands," Isaiah said, his voice deep and resonant, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "It keeps good time." Marcus slammed his glass down on the table, the sharp crack silencing the room again. "I do not care what you made with your dirty hands." Marcus spat, his face flushing with sudden anger. "Look at you. Look at your suit. You walked into an exclusive restaurant looking like a janitor. You are embarrassing my wife, and you are embarrassing me in front of my investors." Kendra finally looked up, her eyes wide with a silent plea. "Marcus, please," Kendra whispered, her voice barely audible over the tension in the room. "Do not interrupt me, Kendra." Marcus snapped, not even looking at her. He kept his cold eyes fixed on Isaiah. "I told you to stay out of our lives, Isaiah. I told Kendra to stop inviting you to these things. You do not belong here. You have nothing to offer us, nothing to teach us, and absolutely nothing we want. Take your little toy and get out of my sight." The silence in the room was absolute. The waiter stood frozen, still holding the carved wooden clock. Isaiah looked at his daughter, seeing the fear hiding behind her expensive makeup, the way she shrank away from her husband and his explosive anger. He did not raise his voice, and he did not show the quiet fury burning behind his eyes. He simply nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. Isaiah kept his hands at his sides as Marcus picked up his glass of expensive scotch again. "Take a good look at this room," Marcus demanded, gesturing to the crystal chandeliers and the fine art on the walls. This dinner alone is costing me $10,000. I pay for the best because I am the best. I do not invite failure to my table, and you, Isaiah, are the definition of failure. Marcus reached into the inside pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a sleek black metal credit card. He slapped it down onto the white linen tablecloth with a loud smack. "You see this?" Marcus asked, his voice loud and booming. "This is unlimited power. This card buys respect, and it buys loyalty. I have investors flying in from New York just to beg me for a piece of my next deal, and you thought a carved piece of wood would impress me?" Kendra closed her eyes tightly, a single tear escaping and sliding down her cheek. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice trembling with humiliation. "That is enough. Please just let him sit down." Marcus slammed his hand on the table, making the fine china rattle. "I said shut up, Kendra," he barked, not caring who heard him. "You act like a spoiled child crying over a useless old man. I pulled you out of the gutter and I gave you the world. I put you in a mansion and I let you drive a luxury car. The least you can do is show some gratitude and respect your husband. You will not undermine me in front of my guests." Kendra immediately fell silent, wiping her tear away quickly and staring down at her expensive plate. Isaiah felt a deep protective fury ignite in his chest, watching his only child cower. But he knew reacting with anger would only give Marcus the validation he craved. The loud man wins the argument, but the silent man wins the war. Isaiah took a slow, deep breath, maintaining his perfect composure. He looked at the black credit card on the table. He knew the bank that issued it. He knew the interest rates, and he knew the dangerous games Marcus was playing to keep it active. It was not a symbol of wealth. It was a heavy chain of debt. "I am not asking you twice," Marcus sneered, pointing a manicured finger toward the back of the room. "Get out of my sight. Go sit by the swinging doors where the waiters drop the dirty dishes, or walk out the front door and never come back. I do not care what you do, just get away from my table. You are ruining my appetite, and you are bringing down the value of the room." The other guests laughed again, a cruel, harmonious sound of fake friends feeding a fake ego. A woman in a red silk dress leaned over to Marcus and whispered something in his ear. Marcus laughed loudly, completely dismissing Isaiah, turning his back on his father-in-law. He raised his glass to the woman, and the rest of the table followed entirely, forgetting the quiet man standing at the end of the long table. Marcus signaled for the waiter, snapping his fingers in the air with extreme arrogance. "Bring us 3 more bottles of the best champagne you have," Marcus ordered, not even looking at the waiter, "and make sure it is the expensive vintage. I want everyone in this restaurant to know that Marcus is celebrating tonight. Do not worry about the price. I have more money than I know what to do with." The waiter nodded quickly, scrambling away to fulfill the loud demand. Marcus leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest, feeling like the absolute king of the world. He looked at Kendra, giving her a cold, warning glare, ensuring she remained completely submissive. She did not dare to look back at him. She just sat there, a beautiful, silent accessory to his massive ego. Isaiah watched the entire performance with cold, calculated eyes. The weapons of the weak were always loud. True power never needed to announce itself. Isaiah stood in the harsh light of the chandelier, letting the cruel laughter wash over him. He did not raise his voice and he did not clench his fists. He simply absorbed the room, calculating every word and every sneer. He looked at his daughter Kendra sitting frozen in her seat. She was staring down at her untouched plate of expensive food, pretending the humiliation was not happening. Her shoulders were hunched, a posture he remembered from when she was a little girl hiding from a loud thunderstorm. But this storm was sitting right next to her, wearing a tailored silk suit and sipping a $200 glass of scotch. Isaiah recognized the deep fear in his daughter, and it fueled a quiet, cold determination in his chest. He also recognized the desperate, hollow nature of the men sitting at the table. They laughed entirely too loud, and they drank entirely too fast. Real power was always quiet, but Marcus was a blaring siren, broadcasting his massive insecurities to anyone who would listen. Marcus needed an audience to believe his own lies. The waiter stepped back up to the table, nervously holding the small box with the hand-carved wooden clock inside. Isaiah gently reached out, taking the small gift back into his own calloused hands. He did not say a single word to the young waiter. He just offered a polite, silent nod of understanding, taking the burden away from the frightened employee. Marcus was already deep in a loud conversation with a wealthy investor across the table. He was boasting about a massive commercial real estate deal, waving his heavy gold watch in the air to emphasize his imaginary success. He had completely dismissed the old man in the faded charcoal suit, fully believing he had won the encounter and asserted his dominance. For one brief, agonizing second, Kendra finally stole a glance upward. Her dark eyes met her father's calm gaze. Her look was a painful mixture of deep shame and a silent, desperate apology. She knew her husband was cruel, and she knew her father did not deserve this public execution. But she was too terrified of Marcus and his explosive temper to speak the truth out loud. She looked away quickly, burying her immense guilt beneath the perfect facade of a happy, wealthy wife. Isaiah did not need to hear a spoken apology, and he certainly did not need to make a theatrical scene. The disrespect had been fully registered, permanently logged into a mental ledger that Marcus did not even know existed. The younger man had chosen to use his illusion of wealth as a blunt weapon to strike down family. Now that same weapon would be dismantled. Isaiah turned slowly on his heel, his worn leather shoes making absolutely no sound on the plush restaurant carpet. He walked with his back straight, his head held high, and his dignity completely intact. He moved deliberately toward the heavy oak doors of the private dining room, leaving the noise and the fake laughter behind him. The air grew cooler as he stepped out into the main lobby of the restaurant, escaping the suffocating grip of Marcus and his fragile, pathetic ego. Isaiah pushed through the heavy glass doors of the restaurant lobby and stepped out into the cool Atlanta night air. The valet attendant rushed forward, expecting to fetch a modest vehicle for the old man in the faded charcoal suit, but Isaiah simply raised a hand, declining the service with a polite nod. He did not own a beat-up truck. He walked past the line of flashy sports cars and loud luxury vehicles parked directly in front of the building. He walked toward the shadows at the far end of the quiet street where true power always waited. A long midnight black Maybach glided smoothly out of the dark alleyway. It made absolutely no sound, pulling up to the curb right beside Isaiah. The tinted windows rolled down, and a driver in a sharp black suit immediately stepped out to open the heavy rear door. "Good evening, Mr. Vance," the driver said, his voice low and deeply respectful. "How was the anniversary dinner, sir?" "It was very revealing, Thomas," Isaiah replied quietly, sliding into the spacious leather interior of the massive car. The door closed with a solid, airtight thud, instantly cutting off the noise of the busy city street. Isaiah sat back in the plush seat, resting the carved wooden clock on his lap. He looked out the tinted window, staring at the glowing restaurant sign one last time. Marcus had demanded an audience for his arrogance. Now Marcus would get an audience for his downfall. Isaiah reached into the inner pocket of his worn charcoal suit and pulled out a heavy encrypted satellite phone. It was not wrapped in gold, and it had no flashy logos. It was a purely functional tool used only for moving massive amounts of capital and dismantling empires. He dialed a private secure number and waited for the encrypted connection to establish. The line clicked, and a crisp, professional voice answered immediately. Julian Isaiah said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "It is time. Pull the plug on everything." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Understood," Sir Julian replied smoothly, the sound of rapid typing echoing in the background. "Do you mean the entire portfolio, Mr. Vance?" Every single safety net, Isaiah instructed, his eyes cold and focused. Marcus believes his black credit cards are backed by his own genius. He is wrong. Those cards are guaranteed by my holding company. I want the guarantees completely withdrawn, effective immediately. Let the bank see his actual debt-to-income ratio without my shadow backing him up. Done, Julian said, the typing growing faster. What about the house and the vehicles, sir? The lease on that luxury SUV is under my corporate umbrella. Isaiah continued, listing the assets with cold precision. Call the dealership first thing in the morning. Tell them the lease is terminated due to breach of contract and order an immediate repossession. And the country club membership, the one he uses to impress his fake investors, cancel it. Flag the account for non-payment. Consider it done. Mr. Vance, Julian confirmed. It will take a few hours for the financial institutions to process the withdrawals. By tomorrow morning, his entire financial structure will collapse. Do you want me to freeze Kendra's personal accounts as well? Isaiah looked down at the wooden clock, feeling a brief, sharp pang of sorrow for his daughter. Yes, Isaiah said, his voice dropping an octave. Freeze her emergency savings account, the one holding the $25,000. She needs to feel the impact, or she will never wake up to the truth about her husband. I will not let that man bleed my family dry just to buy expensive scotch and custom suits. I will initiate the rolling freezes now, sir, Julian said. Is there anything else? Have Detective Andre Vance meet me at the penthouse tomorrow at noon, Isaiah ordered. I want to know exactly who Marcus owes money to, and I want to know exactly what he is hiding in the dark. Marcus wanted to show everyone who he really was tonight. Now I'm going to show him who he really crossed. Isaiah ended the call and slipped the heavy phone back into his pocket. He leaned his head back against the soft leather seat, closing his eyes in the quiet, moving fortress. The dominoes had been perfectly lined up, and he had just flicked the first piece. The morning sun glared through the large windows of the massive master bedroom, waking Marcus with a sharp, pounding headache. He rolled over, pulling the heavy silk sheets away, and groaned loudly. The expensive scotch from the anniversary dinner was still thick on his breath. He did not look at Kendra, who was already awake, sitting quietly on the edge of the large bed. Marcus simply grabbed his heavy gold watch, strapped it to his wrist, and walked into the massive marble bathroom. Today was a day for golf, and a day for closing lucrative deals at the exclusive Oak Ridge Country Club. An hour later, Marcus strutted into the grand lobby of the massive country club. He wore a crisp white polo shirt and tailored khaki pants, looking every bit the successful young executive. He met two wealthy investors, men he had been trying to court for months, on the manicured outdoor patio. They sat under a large green umbrella overlooking the perfectly groomed 18th hole. Marcus immediately ordered a round of imported mimosas and a massive breakfast spread of steak and eggs, making sure to speak loudly to the passing waiters. This club is a second home to me, Marcus bragged, leaning back in his chair and crossing his legs with extreme arrogance. I pay premium dues just to keep the riffraff out. You saw that pathetic old man last night stumbling into a high-class establishment. I had to throw him out just to protect my own brand and my own reputation. The investors chuckled politely, sipping their expensive drinks and slicing into their thick steaks. Marcus Sutton, feeling completely in control of his carefully crafted and highly expensive world. When the plates were finally cleared, a waiter in a sharp uniform approached the table with a leather folder. Marcus did not even look at the bill. He reached into his pocket with an arrogant flourish and pulled out the heavy black metal credit card. Take care of this, Marcus said, tossing the card onto the table. And put a $50 tip on there. I'm feeling very generous today. The waiter picked up the card, offering a tight, polite smile, and walked away toward the main clubhouse. Marcus went back to boasting about his commercial real estate empire and his massive financial projections. But 10 minutes later, the waiter returned. He was not smiling, and he was holding the leather folder very tightly in his hands. The waiter leaned down, keeping his voice low, trying to be completely discreet. "Excuse me, sir," the waiter whispered, holding out the black metal card. "Your card was declined." Marcus stopped talking mid-sentence, his confident smile completely vanishing. He snatched the card from the waiter, his face flushing with sudden hot anger. "What did you just say?" Marcus demanded, his voice rising and instantly catching the attention of the two wealthy investors. "Run it again, you must have typed the numbers wrong." "This is a black card. It does not decline. It has absolutely no limit." "I ran it 3 times, sir." The waiter explained, his voice trembling slightly under the sudden aggressive hostility. "The system says the account is completely frozen. Please, if you have another form of payment, we can try that." Marcus slammed his fist on the table, making the empty crystal glasses rattle loudly. He felt the eyes of the two investors burning into him, full of sudden doubt. He quickly reached into his leather wallet, his fingers shaking slightly, and pulled out a platinum bank card. "Run this one," Marcus snapped, practically throwing the new card at the waiter. "And make it fast before I call the general manager and have you fired for total incompetence." The waiter hurried away, and Marcus forced a stiff, very unnatural laugh. "Bank errors," Marcus explained to his guests, wiping a small bead of cold sweat from his forehead. "You know how these large financial institutions are always flagging massive transactions for fraud protection. It is just the heavy price of doing big business." The investors nodded slowly, their expressions suddenly very cold and highly skeptical. 5 minutes later, the club manager walked out onto the patio. He was a tall, severe man, and he was holding both of Marcus' credit cards. But Marcus, the manager, said, standing tall and speaking loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear perfectly well, "Both of your cards have been permanently declined by the issuing banks. Furthermore, I have received a direct notice from our financial office this very morning. Your membership dues have been flagged for non-payment, and your backing corporate guarantor has been entirely withdrawn." Marcus stood up quickly, his chair scraping loudly against the stone patio. "That is impossible," Marcus shouted, his face turning a deep, angry shade of red. "Do you know who I am? I bring millions of dollars to this entire city." The manager did not flinch, and he did not lower his authoritative voice. "I'm sorry, sir, but I must ask you to settle this bill in cash immediately. If you cannot, I will have to ask you and your guests to leave the premises at once." The two investors slowly stood up, looking at Marcus with complete, undeniable disgust. "We will see ourselves out," one of the investors said, tossing a crisp $100 bill on the table. "Do not call us again, Marcus." Marcus stood completely frozen on the beautiful outdoor patio. He watched his reputation walk away, his massive ego deflating rapidly under the harsh morning sun. He stared at the two useless plastic cards in the manager hand, feeling the first real wave of absolute, terrifying panic crashing into his chest. Marcus stormed out of the Oak Ridge Country Club, his face burning with a humiliation he had never known. He had practically thrown his last $300 in cash on the table, snatching his useless plastic cards from the manager and marching toward the valet stand. He needed the sanctuary of his expensive vehicle to hide from the staring eyes of the wealthy members who were already whispering behind his back. He pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling slightly, dialing his priority banking line, ready to scream at whatever representative answered. But the automated voice simply stated his accounts were locked, directing him to a fraud department that placed him on an endless, agonizing hold. His sleek, silver imported SUV pulled up, and he snatched the keys from the valet without leaving a single dollar for a tip. He drove erratically, speeding through the wealthy suburban streets, his mind racing with impossible scenarios. This had to be a massive technical glitch, a catastrophic error in the banking system that he would ruthlessly sue them for tomorrow. He turned onto his exclusive gated street, the large manicured lawns offering a temporary desperate sense of security. But as he pulled up to his massive driveway, a harsh, mechanical sound shattered his fragile peace. A large, heavy-duty tow truck was backing up to the pristine, white, luxury SUV, parked just outside his closed garage doors. It was Kendra's vehicle, the $80,000 symbol of his supposed success, the one he proudly paraded in front of his wealthy neighbors. Marcus slammed his own vehicle into park, leaping out before the engine even cut off. "Hey!" Marcus screamed, sprinting across the perfectly cut grass, his expensive golf shoes slipping slightly. "What do you think you're doing? Get away from my property right now." The tow truck driver, a massive man in a grease-stained shirt, did not even look up. He continued operating the loud hydraulic levers, sliding the heavy metal forks precisely under the front tires of the white SUV. "I said stop!" Marcus yelled, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and a sudden deep terror. "I'm calling the police. You are stealing my wife's vehicle right out of my driveway." The driver finally turned around, wiping his thick hands on a dirty rag, completely unfazed by the screaming man in the tailored polo shirt. "I'm not stealing anything, buddy," the driver said, his voice a low, bored rumble. "I have a legal repossession order directly from the primary leaseholder." Marcus stopped in his tracks, his chest heaving, his mind struggling to process the impossible words. "There is no primary leaseholder," Marcus spat, stepping closer to the massive driver, trying to use his height for intimidation. "I pay for that vehicle. I'm the owner. You have the wrong address." The driver reached into the cab of his truck, pulling out a thick yellow clipboard and shoved it toward Marcus. "Read it and weep," the driver said indifferently. The corporate guarantor on the lease, a holding company out of downtown, pulled their backing this morning. They cited a total breach of financial contract and ordered an immediate recovery of the asset. Marcus stared at the printed paper, the black ink blurring slightly under the harsh afternoon sun. His name was on the document, but right below it was the name of a massive corporate entity, an entity he recognized with a sickening, violent jolt. It was the same holding company that quietly backed his business loans, the same invisible safety net he had always assumed was just a perk of his own brilliant negotiating skills. He had never questioned why his interest rates were so low or why his credit limits were so impossibly high. He had simply absorbed the benefits, attributing them to his own unmatched greatness. But looking at the cold legal repossession order, a terrifying realization began to claw at his stomach. The money was disappearing rapidly and without warning. "Look," Marcus said, his voice suddenly dropping, losing all of its arrogant bluster. "This is a massive misunderstanding, a simple paperwork error at the corporate level. Let me write you a check right now. I will cover the entire balance. Just unhook the vehicle." The driver laughed a harsh scraping sound and turned back to his hydraulic levers. "I do not take personal checks from guys getting their luxury cars repossessed," the driver said, hitting a heavy button. The white SUV lifted off the ground, the mechanical groans echoing loudly across the quiet, wealthy street. Marcus stood completely paralyzed on his expensive driveway. Two neighbors walking a small pedigree dog stopped on the sidewalk, watching the entire humiliating spectacle with wide, judging eyes. Marcus could feel his carefully constructed world, the illusion of his absolute superiority, cracking rapidly under his feet. He did not scream again, and he did not fight the driver. He just watched in absolute horror as the heavy truck pulled away, dragging his fake wealth down the street, leaving a massive empty space in his driveway. The rolling conflicts were crashing in one after another, and he had absolutely no idea how to stop the bleeding. Marcus practically kicked the heavy oak front door open, stumbling into the grand foyer of his house. His chest was heaving, and his mind was a chaotic storm of panic and rage. He needed to get to his home office, to log into his offshore accounts to find out exactly what glitch was destroying his life. But before he could even reach the curved staircase, he heard a sound that froze the blood in his veins. It was the sound of his wife Kendra crying softly in the massive custom-built kitchen. He rounded the corner, his golf shoes clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. Kendra was sitting on a high velvet stool at the center island, staring blankly at the glowing screen of her laptop. She looked completely pale, her hands trembling slightly over the silver keyboard. She did not even look up when Marcus stormed into the room. Kendra Marcus demanded, his voice tight and defensive, anticipating another disaster. "What is wrong with you? I just had to deal with the most incompetent tow truck driver on the planet. They took your vehicle, but I'm going to sue the entire company tomorrow morning and buy you a better one by noon." Kendra did not react to the promise of a new car. She slowly turned the laptop around, pushing it across the smooth marble counter toward her husband. Her eyes were red, and her voice was a hollow whisper. "The money is gone, Marcus," she said. Marcus walked over, his heart hammering against his ribs, and looked at the screen. It was the online portal for Kendra personal savings account. The balance, which had carefully grown over the last 4 years, now read 0. The $25,000, the money she had diligently saved from her own salary as a senior consultant, had completely vanished. "What did you do?" Marcus snapped, his initial shock instantly morphing into aggressive blame. "Did you click on a scam email, Kendra? I told you to be careful with these joint accounts. You have just compromised our entire financial network." "I did not do anything," Kendra cried, her voice rising with sudden, desperate panic. "I logged in to transfer the funds to the long-term care facility for your mother. You told me Ms. Ruby needed the surgery deposit by tomorrow or they would discharge her. I was sending the $25,000 today, just like we agreed. But the account is completely empty." Marcus stared at the screen, a cold sweat breaking out across his forehead. He knew exactly where that $25,000 went. He had personally transferred it 3 weeks ago, masking the transaction through a shell company. He had not used it for his sick mother. Ms. Ruby was living in a rundown apartment on the south side, completely unaware of any supposed medical treatments. Marcus had used that money to cover his massive, crippling gambling debts and to buy a diamond tennis bracelet for a woman Kendra did not know existed. "This is a banking error," Marcus lied, waving his hand dismissively, though his pulse was racing like a trapped animal. "I told you there is a massive glitch in the system today. My black cards were declined at the club, and the leasing company made a massive error with your SUV. The bank has frozen everything for a security audit. The money is still there. It is just temporarily invisible." Kendra shook her head, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes. "It does not say frozen, Marcus," she said, pointing a trembling finger at the screen. "Look at the transaction history. It shows a direct wire transfer authorized by you, moving the entire $25,000 into an external account." Marcus felt the walls of the massive kitchen closing in on him. He needed to spin a new lie, a better lie, before his wife unraveled his entire life. The rolling conflicts were suffocating him, one disaster crashing into another, leaving him no room to breathe. He reached out, slamming the laptop shut with a loud, aggressive crack, making Kendra jump in her seat. "I said I will handle it," Marcus yelled, leaning over the marble island, using his height and his anger to force her back into submission. "I am moving massive amounts of capital right now, Kendra. I am restructuring our entire portfolio to secure our future. I had to leverage your small savings account to cover a temporary liquidity gap on a multi-million-dollar commercial project. It is called business something you clearly do not understand. You took the money without asking me." Kendra whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of his anger. "That was for your mother, Marcus. She is sick, and she is relying on us. How could you gamble with her health for a business deal? She will be fine," Marcus sneered, dismissing the woman who raised him with absolute callousness. "I will write the care facility a personal check tomorrow from my corporate account. You need to stop panicking over pennies, Kendra. You are acting like a hysterical child, and it is incredibly distracting. I have a financial empire to fix, and I cannot do it with you crying in my kitchen." Marcus turned his back on his wife, refusing to answer any more questions, and stormed out of the room. He left Kendra sitting alone in the silent, expensive kitchen, staring at the closed laptop. the illusion of her perfect marriage fracturing right before her eyes. High above the suffocating heat of the Atlanta streets, the private elevator doors slid open with a soft, expensive chime. Isaiah stepped out into the massive penthouse suite, his posture completely transformed. He was no longer the quiet, hunched old man in the faded charcoal suit from the restaurant the night before. He wore a perfectly tailored midnight blue suit, the fabric screaming of quiet generational wealth. The entire top floor of the towering glass skyscraper belonged to him, a sprawling command center of glass and steel overlooking the vast city skyline. Dozens of financial analysts and high-powered corporate attorneys moved quietly across the polished stone floors. They carried thick, classified portfolios, speaking in hushed, urgent tones about international acquisitions and global markets. They parted respectfully as Isaiah walked past, offering brief, highly deferential nods, recognizing the absolute authority in the room. This was the unseen empire, the massive holding company that quietly pulled the economic strings of the entire city real estate market. Marcus thought he was a king, shouting at waiters and flashing plastic credit cards. But Marcus was merely a loud, insignificant pawn playing on a massive board that Isaiah completely owned. Isaiah had built this fortress from nothing using relentless discipline and a brilliant calculating mind. He hid his immense wealth on purpose, using it as a shield to protect his family and a weapon to destroy his enemies. At the far end of the sprawling penthouse behind a massive mahogany desk stood Detective Andre Vance. Andre was a tall, sharp man with piercing dark eyes, wearing a dark gray suit that expertly hid the heavy firearm at his hip. He was not a cheap, hourly private investigator working out of a dusty strip mall. Andre was a former federal agent commanding a private elite intelligence firm retained exclusively by Isaiah and his massive corporate umbrella. "Good afternoon, Mr. Vance," Andre said, stepping forward immediately and offering a firm, deeply respectful handshake. "We have been extremely busy this morning, executing every single order exactly as you requested." Isaiah returned the handshake, his face a permanent mask of cold, calculated focus. "Walk me through the damage," Isaiah instructed, stepping toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the tiny cars crawling through the city streets. "Tell me exactly how deep the rot goes in my daughter's marriage." Andre picked up a thick leather-bound tablet, swiping through complex layers of encrypted financial data. The rolling account freezes were executed flawlessly at dawn. Andre reported, keeping his voice crisp and strictly professional. "The corporate credit lines are entirely dead, the luxury vehicle has been legally repossessed, and the country club membership has been publicly and permanently revoked. Marcus is currently experiencing a total catastrophic liquidity crisis." And Kendra Isaiah asked, his voice softening just a fraction, the image of his terrified daughter flashing in his mind. Did she discover the missing funds from her private emergency account? "Yes, sir," Andre replied, nodding slowly, his expression turning grim. "We monitored the secure banking portal activity. Kendra logged in at exactly 9 this morning, attempting to transfer the $25,000 for his mother medical care. She found the account completely drained, zeroed out by a wire transfer authorized late last night. We intercepted a brief, highly elevated audio recording from their home security system. Marcus aggressively gaslighted her, blaming corporate restructuring and massive banking errors. He screamed at her until she stopped asking questions. Isaiah clenched his jaw tightly, a thick muscle ticking slightly beneath his cheek. "The absolute coward," Isaiah said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register that made the surrounding analysts walk a little faster. "He steals from his own wife to cover his pathetic failures, and then he screams at her when she catches him red-handed. He is a parasite, draining her dry while waving a heavy gold watch in the air, pretending to be a self-made titan." "He is worse than a parasite," Sir Andre said, tapping the glass screen of his secure tablet and bringing up a new, highly classified digital file. "He is a complete fraud. living a double life entirely funded by your daughter, hard-earned savings, and your invisible corporate backing. Isaiah turned away from the sprawling city view, his dark eyes narrowing sharply, locking onto the detective. "Show me the proof," Isaiah demanded, walking slowly back to the massive mahogany desk. "Show me exactly what this loud, pathetic man is hiding in the dark." Andre reached into his thick leather briefcase, pulling out a stack of high-resolution photographs and heavy financial ledgers. He spread them out across the smooth mahogany desk, right in front of Isaiah. The first photograph showed Marcus smiling widely, walking out of an upscale jewelry store in Buckhead. But he was not holding Kendra's hand. He had his arm wrapped tightly around the waist of a young woman wearing a designer dress. "This is Chloe," Andre said, his voice completely flat and devoid of any sympathy. "She is 24 years old, a fitness instructor, and Marcus has been aggressively funding her entire lifestyle for the past 8 months. He pays the rent on her luxury apartment, and he leases her sports car using a shadow account we just uncovered." Isaiah stared at the photograph, his jaw clenching so hard his teeth ached. He looked at the young woman holding a shopping bag from the expensive jewelry boutique, completely unaware of the stolen money paying for her gifts. "My daughter is working late nights," Isaiah said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "She is stressing over budgets and transferring her hard-earned savings to save his sick mother. And he is buying diamonds for a mistress. It gets much worse." "Mr. Van Ves," Andre replied, sliding a certified bank statement and a glossy retail receipt directly under the photograph. "Look at the timestamps and look at the exact dollar amounts." Isaiah picked up the heavy paper, his dark eyes scanning the precise numbers. The bank statement showed the exact moment the $25,000 vanished from Kendra's emergency savings account. The timestamp read 11:45 at night. Directly next to it, the retail receipt from the high-end Buckhead jeweler showed a purchase made at 10:15 the very next morning. The total cost was $24,800 for a custom platinum and diamond tennis bracelet. He did not even wait 24 hours. Isaiah observed his voice dripping with pure concentrated disgust. He stole from his own wife in the dark and put diamonds on another woman by the morning. And he used his sick elderly mother as the excuse to commit the theft. "That is exactly correct," Sir Andre confirmed, nodding his head slowly. "We intercepted Chloe's social media accounts before she locked them down. She posted a video of the diamond bracelet thanking her generous, wealthy boyfriend. Marcus completely erased Kendra from his life when he was with this woman. He told Chloe he was an unmarried, highly successful real estate tycoon looking for a trophy wife." Isaiah dropped the receipt back onto the desk as if it were infected with a deadly disease. He felt a deep, sickening wave of anger washing over him. He remembered Kendra's face at the restaurant, the way she shrank down, terrified of a man who was nothing but a hollow, thieving shell. Marcus had absolutely no wealth of his own. He was building his entire fake empire on the back of Kendra's labor and Isaiah, invisible grace. "Does Chloe know the money is gone?" Isaiah asked, leaning back in his chair, a cold, strategic light returning to his eyes. "Not yet," Andre answered, tapping the screen of his secure tablet. "But she will find out today. We just froze the shadow account paying her rent, and we alerted the luxury car dealership to immediately repossess her sports car. By tonight, Marcus will not be able to buy her a cup of coffee." "Good," Isaiah said, steepling his fingers together. Let him feel the walls closing in. Let him realize that a fake king without his stolen gold is just a clown in a cheap suit. Isaiah looked at the receipts for the mistress, feeling a cold satisfaction that the tap was finally shut off. "But a diamond bracelet does not explain a complete financial collapse," Isaiah said, leaning forward and resting his arms on the heavy mahogany desk. "Marcus makes $200,000 a year on paper alone. Where's the rest of his commission money going, Andre?" Andre did not smile, and his expression grew even darker. He reached back into his heavy leather briefcase and pulled out a thick black folder, The mistress is just a symptom of a much larger disease, Mr. Vance Andre explained, sliding the black folder across the polished wood. Marcus is not just arrogant, and he is not just a thief. He is a severe, degenerate gambler, and he is drowning in a very dark ocean. Isaiah opened the black folder, his eyes scanning the detailed surveillance logs and the intercepted encrypted messages. What kind of gambling? Isaiah asked, expecting to see records from legitimate casinos or online sports betting accounts. It is an exclusive high-stakes underground poker ring, Andre said, keeping his voice strictly professional, but laced with a clear warning. It is run by a very dangerous organized syndicate operating out of a warehouse district on the east side of Atlanta. Marcus has been sitting at tables with men who do not care about his tailored suits or his fake black credit cards. They only care about cash, and Marcus has run out of it. Isaiah studied a grainy night vision photograph showing Marcus walking out of a windowless warehouse looking terrified and completely exhausted. How deep is the hole? Isaiah asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He owes the syndicate exactly $500,000, Andre revealed, tapping a specific column of numbers on the page. And that is just the principal amount, sir. The street interest is compounding weekly. Marcus has been frantically shifting money around, taking out fraudulent corporate loans under your daughter name just to make the minimum weekly payments and keep his legs from being broken. Isaiah felt a sudden sharp spike of genuine alarm. Not for the loud, pathetic man, but for Kendra. He used my daughter name, Isaiah demanded, his hands gripping the edges of the heavy desk. He forged her signature on 3 separate high-interest loan applications. Andre confirmed, nodding his head slowly. He is desperate, Mr. Vance. The syndicate does not send polite collection letters, and they do not send tow trucks with clipboards. When you ordered the global freeze on his accounts this morning, you cut off his ability to juggle the massive debt. The music has completely stopped, and Marcus does not have a chair. Isaiah leaned back in his heavy leather chair, his mind processing the dangerous new reality. The corporate freeze was meant to humiliate him and expose his lies. But this street debt brought a completely different level of extreme danger directly to his family doorstep. The syndicate is not going to wait for a bank transfer. Andre continued, reading the silent concern on his employer face. They have been tracking his movements, and they know he lost his country club access today. Our surveillance teams intercepted a very brief, highly threatening phone call just an hour ago. The collectors are actively looking for him right now. Let them find him. Isaiah said, his voice completely devoid of any mercy. He wanted to play the role of a massive, untouchable kingpin. Now he can deal with the actual predators living in the real jungle. What about Kendra? Andre asked, leaning forward slightly. If the syndicate cannot squeeze the money out of Marcus, they will look at his wife and they will look at that expensive house in the suburbs. Isaiah stood up, buttoning his tailored suit jacket, his eyes burning with a fierce protective fire. You will put a 4-man security detail on my daughter immediately, Isaiah ordered, pointing a firm finger at the detective. They are to remain completely out of sight, but if any of those street collectors even breathe in her direction, you have my full authorization to neutralize the threat. It will be done within the hour, Andre promised, standing up and gathering the heavy files. And what about Marcus, sir? Marcus is going to panic, Isaiah predicted, turning to look out the massive glass windows at the sprawling city below. When the predators corner him, he will look for a way out. He will try to steal something much larger to save his own pathetic life. We are going to let him dig his own grave, and then we are going to bury him in it. Marcus drove his remaining leased sedan, a sleek black import, recklessly down the interstate. He had left his weeping wife in the middle of their massive kitchen, running away from the consequences of his own theft. He pulled into a dark concrete parking garage, hidden beneath a towering bank building in the financial district. He had spent the last 2 hours sitting in a plush banker office begging for a high-interest bridge loan. The bank manager had practically laughed him out of the room, staring at a computer screen that showed a complete catastrophic credit freeze. Marcus slammed his car door shut, the sound echoing loudly against the thick concrete walls. He loosened his silk tie, his breathing shallow and frantic. The heavy gold watch on his wrist suddenly felt like a heavy shackle. He pulled out his phone, staring at the blank screen, desperately trying to think of another wealthy investor he could scam for quick cash. "Going somewhere, Marcus." A deep voice echoed from the shadows of the lower parking level. Marcus froze, his expensive leather shoes squeaking slightly on the oily concrete floor. He turned around, his heart slamming against his ribs like a trapped bird. Two massive men stepped out from behind a thick concrete pillar. They were not wearing tailored suits, and they were not carrying leather briefcases. They wore dark denim and heavy leather jackets, moving with a terrifying predatory grace. The taller man, a heavily scarred enforcer named Silas, smiled with a cold, dead expression. Marcus forced a fake, arrogant laugh, trying to summon the kingpin persona that had worked so well at the country club. "Gentlemen," Marcus said, holding up a trembling hand. "You startled me. Tell the boss I'm just waiting on a massive wire transfer from an offshore account. The banking system is experiencing a major glitch today, but I will have the weekly payment by tomorrow morning." Silas did not stop walking. He closed the distance in 3 long strides, his heavy boots echoing ominously. "There is no wire transfer, Marcus," Silas said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "The boss knows you lost your invisible corporate backing today. The whole street knows your black cards are dead, and your wife's car got dragged out of your fancy driveway. You are completely broke, and you are completely out of time." "Look, Silas," Marcus pleaded, taking a rapid step backward, his back hitting the cold metal of his leased sedan. "I have major assets. I have commercial real estate deals closing next week. I just need a small extension, just a few days to liquidate some heavy capital." Silas lunged forward, his massive hand shooting out like a striking snake. He grabbed Marcus by the collar of his expensive designer shirt and slammed him brutally against the car window. The glass rattled violently and the breath was completely knocked out of Marcus' lungs. He gasped for air, his perfectly styled hair falling into his terrified eyes. The second man stepped up, casually blocking the only exit, crossing his massive arms over his chest. "The boss is done listening to your fake executive speeches," Silas growled, leaning in close, smelling like stale tobacco and absolute violence. "You owe $500,000, Marcus, and that does not even cover the late fees for the bounced payments this month. You have been playing a dangerous game, pretending to be a whale when you are nothing but a bottom feeder." "I will get the money," Marcus choked out, his face turning a deep shade of purple under the crushing grip. "I swear to you, I will get every single penny. Just let me breathe, please, let me breathe." Silas released his grip, letting Marcus slump down against the side of the black sedan. Marcus clutched his throat, coughing violently, staring up at the 2 terrifying enforcers with pure, unadulterated fear. The illusion of his power was completely shattered, leaving a pathetic, desperate man begging on a dirty concrete floor. "You have exactly 48 hours," Silas announced, his voice echoing coldly in the empty garage. "If the boss does not have $500,000 in cold hard cash by Saturday night, we are not going to ask you politely again. We are going to start breaking pieces of you, Marcus. And when we are done with you, we are going to pay a very nice, very long visit to that beautiful wife of yours sitting in that big empty house." Marcus felt a cold, terrifying sickness settle deep in his stomach. "Leave Kendra out of this," Marcus whispered, his voice shaking uncontrollably. "She does not know anything about the debt. She does not have any money." "That sounds like a personal problem," Silas said, turning his back and walking away, his heavy boots echoing loudly. 48 hours, Marcus. Tick-tock. Marcus stayed on the filthy concrete floor long after the 2 enforcers had disappeared into the shadows. The rolling conflicts had finally cornered him, pushing him to the absolute edge of a dark, terrifying cliff. He could not run, and he could not hide. He needed a massive amount of capital, and he needed it immediately, or he was a dead man. Marcus dragged himself off the oily concrete floor, his expensive designer suit stained and ruined. His hands were shaking violently as he fumbled for his car keys. He drove back to his sprawling suburban mansion, his mind a frantic, terrifying blur. He had exactly 48 hours to find $500,000, or he was a dead man. The rolling conflicts had finally cornered him, leaving him no room to breathe and no room to lie. He stormed through the heavy oak front door, completely ignoring Kendra, who was standing in the hallway with red, swollen eyes. He did not say a word to his wife. He just marched straight to his massive home office and slammed the heavy mahogany door shut, turning the brass lock with a loud click. "Open the door, Marcus!" Kendra cried, pounding her fists against the solid wood. "We need to talk about the money. We need to fix this. Go away, Kendra." Marcus yelled, his voice cracking with absolute desperation. "I am fixing it. Just leave me alone." He practically fell into his plush leather desk chair, ripping the silk tie from his neck and throwing it on the floor. He opened his sleek silver laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard in a blind panic. He logged into his remaining banking portals, desperately hoping for a miracle, but every single screen flashed red. Account frozen access denied, zero balance. The walls were rapidly closing in, suffocating his fake empire. Marcus rested his head in his trembling hands, trying to suppress a violent wave of nausea. He needed a lifeline, any lifeline, no matter how dirty or illegal. He opened his desk drawers frantically, tearing through old paper files, looking for forgotten stock certificates or hidden property deeds. He found absolutely nothing of value. He was completely mathematically bankrupt. Then a sudden sharp memory pierced through his panic. He remembered the greasy yellow clipboard in the hands of the massive tow truck driver. He remembered the name of the invisible corporate guarantor, the massive entity that had pulled his funding and repossessed the luxury SUV. Vance Global Holdings. Marcus whispered to the empty room, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Vance was Kendra's maiden name. Vance was the last name of the pathetic old man he had humiliated at the anniversary dinner. A cold, terrifying realization began to form in his chest. It had to be a massive coincidence, an impossible trick of the universe. But Marcus was desperate enough to chase a ghost. He opened a premium high-level background search database, a tool he usually used to scam his wealthy real estate clients. He typed the name Vance Global Holdings into the search bar. His hands shaking so badly, he misspelled it twice. He hit enter and watched the loading screen spin, his heart hammering against his ribs. The search results populated on the glowing screen and Marcus stopped breathing. It was not a coincidence. The database revealed a massive, sprawling corporate web of commercial real estate, international logistics, and offshore shell companies. The net worth of the holding company was absolutely staggering, stretching into the hundreds of millions. Marcus scrolled down, his eyes wide with absolute horror and pure intoxicating greed. He found the list of corporate officers, and sitting at the very top of the board of directors as the sole majority shareholder was Isaiah Vance. Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, the blood completely draining from his face. The old man in the faded charcoal suit, the man he had banished to the back of the restaurant, was a billionaire. Isaiah was the invisible king, quietly controlling the entire financial board, while Marcus played the role of a loud, insignificant clown. Isaiah had funded the loans, approved the credit limits, and provided the safety net, all to protect his daughter, and Marcus had bitten the hand that secretly fed him. A sudden electric jolt of desperate hope shot through Marcus' veins. If Isaiah was a billionaire, then the money to pay off the syndicate actually existed. Marcus just needed to find a way to get his hands on it. He opened a new search tab, pulling up confidential property records and complex legal filings linked directly to Kendra's social security number. He dug deep into the digital archives, bypassing standard privacy walls, his panic fueling a manic, obsessive focus. After 20 agonizing minutes, he finally found the golden ticket. It was a massive, irrevocable trust fund. The Vanguard Legacy Trust, established 30 years ago and quietly growing into a massive fortune. The legal documents were complex, protected by a fortress of ironclad clauses. Kendra was listed as the sole primary beneficiary, but she clearly had absolutely no idea the money even existed. She was crying over $25,000 while a fortune waited in the shadows. Marcus stared at the specific clause that dictated the release of the funds. The trust was completely locked down. Kendra could not access a single penny of it until her 50th birthday. There was only one person who held the golden key. The sole trustee, the only man with the legal authority to liquidate the assets and transfer the cash, was Isaiah Vance. Marcus wiped a bead of cold sweat from his forehead, a dark, twisted smile spreading across his face. $500,000 was nothing, just a tiny drop in a massive ocean of wealth. The money was right there waiting to save his life. But Isaiah was standing in the way. Marcus knew he could never apologize and he could never ask the old man for help. Isaiah hated him, and Isaiah would gladly watch the street collectors break his legs. If Marcus wanted to survive the next 48 hours, he could not ask for the money. He had to steal it. Marcus stared at the glowing computer screen, his mind racing through the dark, twisted possibilities. He had to steal from a billionaire, but he could not just hack into a secure corporate account. Isaiah Vance was a ghost, a financial phantom who hid behind armies of elite lawyers and corporate shields. But Isaiah was also an old man. Marcus reasoned, a quiet, unassuming old man who lived alone in a modest brick house on the south side of town. That was his one critical weakness. Marcus paced across the thick Persian rug of his massive home office, rubbing his temples frantically. The syndicate enforcers had promised to break his legs and then come for Kendra if he did not produce $500,000 in less than 48 hours. He did not have time for a complex offshore wire fraud scheme. He needed something brutal, fast, and legally binding on paper. He sat back down in his heavy leather chair and typed a new desperate search query into the legal database. He bypassed real estate law and dived straight into eldercare and estate management. He read through dense legal codes, his eyes scanning for loopholes and quick financial bypasses. He searched for terms like medical power of attorney conservatorship and declaring legal incompetence. A dark, vicious plan began to take shape in his desperate mind. If Isaiah was suddenly declared mentally unfit, completely incapable of managing his own massive fortune, the legal control of the Vanguard Legacy Trust would have to shift. Kendra was the primary beneficiary, but Kendra was currently a weeping, emotional wreck in the kitchen, completely ignorant of the family wealth. Marcus was her legal husband, and he could easily manipulate her into granting him total administrative control over her father's estate. But a judge would require proof, Marcus muttered to the empty room, his voice shaking with a cold, manic energy. A judge would need a signed document, a sworn medical affidavit, or a complete transfer of power signed directly by the old man himself. He could not force Isaiah into a courtroom, and he certainly could not trick a team of elite corporate lawyers into handing over the keys to the kingdom. He had to bypass the lawyers entirely. He had to go directly to the source and get Isaiah's signature on a forged, legally binding document before the old man even knew he was under attack. Marcus opened a new encrypted document on his silver laptop. He began to type rapidly, his fingers flying across the keys, fueled by pure, unadulterated panic. He was not drafting a standard real estate contract. He was drafting a weapon. He needed a document that looked completely harmless, something mundane and boring like a standard tax liability waiver or a simple property consent form. Something an old, unsuspecting man would sign without reading the fine print. But buried deep within the legal jargon, hidden beneath layers of dense, confusing clauses, would be a complete, irrevocable transfer of power of attorney. It would grant Marcus absolute total control over the Vanguard Legacy Trust and all liquid assets tied to the Vance name, citing severe cognitive decline and senility. It was a massive, incredibly dangerous federal crime. Forging a legal document and defrauding a major corporate estate carried a mandatory prison sentence. But Marcus did not care about federal prison because federal prison was years away, and the syndicate enforcers were coming on Saturday night. He had to survive the weekend, and this desperate criminal forgery was his absolute only way out. He printed the drafted document, the expensive laser printer humming quietly in the corner of the dark office. He picked up the warm pages, staring at the black ink, his hands trembling slightly. The legal language was thick and deliberately confusing. It was a perfect trap designed to snare an old man who supposedly did not understand modern finance. But Marcus knew his own amateur drafting skills would not survive a rigorous legal challenge. If he presented this document to a major bank trying to withdraw $500,000 in emergency cash, they would instantly flag it for review. He needed professional help to make the forgery look absolutely airtight. He needed an attorney who was just as corrupt and just as desperate as he was. Marcus reached for his phone, scrolling through his long list of shady real estate contacts. He skipped past the legitimate brokers and the honest escrow officers. He stopped on a specific name, a disgraced, suspended lawyer who operated out of a rundown strip mall on the edge of the city limits. This lawyer specialized in dirty evictions, forged deeds, and looking the other way for a heavy cash fee. Marcus dialed the number, his heart pounding a frantic, terrifying rhythm against his ribs. The phone rang 3 times before a gruff, heavily accented voice answered. "I need a major favor," Marcus said, keeping his voice low and entirely urgent. "I have a very sensitive, highly lucrative document that needs to be legally formalized and aggressively expedited, and I need it done tonight with no questions asked." The lawyer on the other end of the line let out a dry, rasping laugh. "Everything costs money, Marcus," the lawyer replied smoothly. "And I hear your black cards are completely dead on arrival today." "I have cash," Marcus lied smoothly, his survival instincts completely taking over. "I will bring you $10,000 in crisp $100 bills tonight. Just meet me at your office and bring your official notary stamp." The line went dead, confirming the dark criminal pact. Marcus slipped the printed pages into a thick leather folder. He had the plan, he had the legal weapon, and he had the crooked lawyer. Now all he needed was the signature of the billionaire he had publicly humiliated just 24 hours ago. The neon sign buzzed loudly outside the faded brick strip mall, casting a sickly red glow over the empty parking lot. Marcus parked his leased black sedan near an overflowing dumpster, checking his rearview mirror in pure paranoia. He stepped out into the humid Atlanta night, gripping the thick leather folder tightly against his ruined designer suit. He walked up to a glass door covered in cheap, peeling window tint. The gold lettering on the glass simply read, "Arthur Sterling, Legal Consulting." Marcus pushed the door open, stepping into an office that smelled strongly of stale cigarette smoke and cheap coffee. The carpet was heavily stained, and the fluorescent lights above flickered with a constant, irritating hum. Arthur sat behind a scratched laminate desk, surrounded by towering stacks of dusty, unorganized files. He was a heavy man, wearing a wrinkled mustard-yellow shirt with dark sweat stains blooming under his arms. "You look like a man falling out of an airplane," Arthur said, leaning back in his squeaking chair and crossing his thick arms. "Where's my $10,000 in cash, Marcus?" Marcus walked right up to the desk, his breathing shallow and rapid. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his heavy custom gold watch. He slammed the expensive timepiece down onto the scratched laminate surface, the gold clinking sharply against the wood. I could not get to the bank. Marcus lied, his voice tight and completely desperate. My accounts are locked in a corporate audit. But that watch is solid gold, and it retails for $25,000. Take it and do exactly what I tell you to do. Arthur picked up the heavy watch, examining the diamond bezel with a slow, greedy smile. He held it up to the flickering fluorescent light, checking the weight and the sweeping second hand. This will cover the retainer, Arthur said, slipping the watch into his desk drawer and locking it with a small brass key. Now let me see this highly lucrative document you drafted in a blind panic. Marcus opened his leather folder and slid the printed pages across the desk. I need to take complete legal control of a massive irrevocable trust, Marcus explained, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper. The sole trustee is an old man, my father-in-law, Isaiah Vance. I drafted a transfer of power, but it needs your official notary stamp, and it needs to look completely bulletproof. Arthur put on a pair of scratched reading glasses and scanned the pages, his eyes moving rapidly over the text. After 2 minutes, he let out a harsh, rasping laugh and tossed the papers back toward Marcus. This is complete garbage, Arthur sneered, shaking his head in total amusement. You cannot just write, I'm taking all the money, and expect a judge to sign off on it. If you walk into a bank with this, they will laugh at you right before they call the federal authorities. Then fix it, Marcus demanded, slamming his hands flat on the desk, leaning aggressively over the heavy lawyer. I do not have time for a legal lecture, Arthur. I have dangerous people looking for me, and I need $500,000 by Saturday night. If I do not get this money, I'm a dead man. Arthur stopped laughing, seeing the absolute unhinged terror in Marcus' eyes. He turned to his heavy, outdated computer monitor, and his fingers began to strike the dirty keyboard with surprising speed. If you want to steal a trust from a family member, Arthur explained, his voice cold and purely transactional, you have to prove that the primary trustee is completely incapable of managing the assets. You need to declare him mentally unfit and legally senile. How do we do that? Marcus asked, his heart hammering against his ribs, staring blindly at the glowing computer screen. We hide the poison inside the apple, Arthur said, clicking his computer mouse rapidly. I'm drafting a standard, highly complex corporate tax liability waiver. It is 50 pages of boring, completely unreadable financial jargon. I will bury the conservatorship clause and the full power of attorney transfer deep inside the middle of the document. The clause will explicitly state that Isaiah Vance acknowledges his own severe cognitive decline and voluntarily surrenders all financial control to you to prevent absolute financial ruin. Marcus felt a sudden electric rush of dark victory. That is brilliant, Marcus said, wiping a bead of cold sweat from his forehead. He is an old man. He lives in a cheap brick house on the south side. He does not understand complex legal paperwork. I will tell him Kendra is facing severe tax penalties and she will go to federal prison if he does not sign the waiver. He will sign anything to protect his daughter. Arthur hit the print button, and a thick stack of heavy legal paper began to slide out of the laser printer. Do not underestimate the elderly, Arthur warned, gathering the warm pages and stacking them neatly on the desk. You need to make sure he does not have a lawyer read this before he picks up the pen. If a real corporate attorney sees this buried clause, you are going to prison for massive felony fraud. He does not have a lawyer, Marcus scoffed, full of his old pathetic arrogance returning. He is a nobody. He wore a faded, cheap suit to my anniversary dinner. He is just a stubborn old man trying to hold on to a tiny little bank account. He will sign the paper and I will be the legal king of his entire estate by tomorrow morning. Arthur pulled a heavy metal notary stamp from his drawer. He stamped the bottom of the signature page, pressing down hard, leaving a permanent official blue seal. He handed the thick stack of forged documents back to Marcus. You have the weapon, Arthur said, his voice completely devoid of any morality. Now go hunt your father-in-law, and Marcus, do not ever come back to this office. Marcus snatched the documents, holding them tightly against his chest like a protective shield. He turned around and practically ran out of the dingy office, stepping back into the humid, dark night. The trap was perfectly set and the bait was fully prepared. He just had to deliver the performance of a lifetime to save his own miserable life. The modest brick house sat quietly on a tree-lined street on the working-class south side of Atlanta. It was a well-kept home with a small, perfectly manicured lawn and a simple wooden porch swing. It looked exactly like the kind of house a retired, unassuming man would live in. It was the perfect elaborate decoy that Isaiah maintained to keep the bloodsuckers and the aggressive corporate predators completely blind to his true empire. Marcus parked his leased sedan halfway down the block, making sure to avoid the direct line of sight from the front window. He took a deep, steadying breath, his hands clutching the thick leather folder containing the 50-page forged legal trap. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror, deliberately mussing his expensive hair and pulling his silk tie loose. He needed to look completely broken, desperate, and utterly terrified for his wife. He walked up the concrete path, the morning sun casting long shadows across the small yard. He rehearsed his lines, preparing to deliver the most critical performance of his entire life. The syndicate enforcers had given him less than 36 hours, and the heavy weight of that deadline added a genuine frantic edge to his carefully calculated panic. He reached the front porch and knocked on the simple wooden door. He did not ring the doorbell, opting for a frantic, urgent rapping of his knuckles. A few moments later, the door opened and Isaiah stood in the threshold. He wore a simple, faded plaid shirt and worn denim jeans, looking every bit the quiet, retired old man from the restaurant. Isaiah looked at Marcus, his face a perfect, unreadable mask of mild surprise and lingering disappointment. "Marcus," Isaiah said, his voice deep and completely steady, "what are you doing at my home?" Marcus did not hesitate. He immediately dropped his shoulders, his face crumbling into a mask of pure, absolute agony. He let out a choked, desperate sob, a sound he had practiced in his car for 20 minutes. "Isaiah," Marcus cried, his voice cracking violently. "Please, I need your help. I made a terrible, terrible mistake, and Kendra is going to pay the price." Isaiah did not step aside, and he did not invite the frantic man inside. He simply crossed his arms over his chest, his dark eyes analyzing every single micro-expression on Marcus' face. "What kind of mistake?" Isaiah asked, keeping his tone entirely neutral. Marcus fell to his knees right on the wooden porch, the thick leather folder clutched tightly to his chest. He looked up at his father-in-law, tears streaming down his face, a masterclass in aggressive, manipulative gaslighting. "The business." Marcus sobbed, his voice echoing loudly on the quiet street. "The commercial real estate firm, it completely collapsed. The market turned and I lost everything. I lost the house, I lost the cars, and the bank froze all of our accounts." "I am aware of your financial difficulties," Isaiah replied, his voice a low, cold rumble refusing to validate the hysterical performance. "But Kendra is my daughter, and I will ensure she is protected. You can leave now." "No," Marcus screamed, scrambling forward slightly on his knees. "You do not understand, Isaiah. It is not just the banks." I panicked. "I was trying to save our home, and I signed Kendra's name to a series of massive corporate tax documents. The IRS is conducting a full aggressive federal audit, and they are threatening to indict her for severe tax evasion. They are going to send my wife to federal prison, Isaiah." Isaiah felt a sudden sharp spike of genuine fury at the sheer audacity of the lie. He knew exactly where the debt came from, and he knew exactly who was hunting Marcus. The syndicate enforcers did not carry IRS badges, and they did not care about federal audits. But Isaiah kept his face perfectly blank, playing the role of the terrified protective father flawlessly. "Prison," Isaiah whispered, letting a slight, highly calculated tremor enter his voice. "How much money do they want, Marcus?" $500,000, Marcus choked out, recognizing the slight opening and driving his wedge deep. The IRS agent said, "If we can liquidate a massive cash payment by tomorrow, they will completely drop the criminal charges against Kendra. But my accounts are dead and my credit is ruined. I am begging you, Isaiah. I know you have a small retirement account, maybe a life insurance policy we can borrow against. I will pay you back every single penny, I swear on my life." Isaiah looked down at the pathetic weeping man kneeling on his front porch. The bait had been thrown, and the trap was wide open. "Come inside." "Marcus," Isaiah said, finally stepping back and opening the door to his modest, quiet decoy home. "Let us see how we can save my daughter." Marcus stepped into the dimly lit living room of the small brick house. The air smelled of old paper and stale peppermint. The furniture was worn, consisting of a faded floral sofa and a simple wooden coffee table. It was the absolute perfect stage for a billionaire pretending to be a pauper. Marcus felt a massive surge of arrogant confidence walking into the humble space. He was the shark, and this old man was the easiest prey in the ocean. "Sit down, Marcus," Isaiah said, his voice carrying a slight, highly rehearsed quaver. He shuffled slowly toward a worn armchair, leaning heavily on the wooden armrest as he lowered himself down. He made sure his hands trembled slightly, a masterful physical performance designed to feed the massive ego of the thief sitting across from him. "Tell me exactly what is happening," Isaiah pleaded, widening his dark eyes, projecting absolute terror for his daughter. Marcus sat on the edge of the floral sofa, opening his thick leather folder with aggressive, practiced urgency. He pulled out the 50-page stack of dense legal paper. "It is the federal government," Isaiah Marcus began, keeping his voice frantic and breathless. "The commercial markets crashed and my accountants made a massive, catastrophic filing error. The IRS audited our entire portfolio yesterday, and they found severe discrepancies tied directly to Kendra's social security number." Isaiah let out a sharp, frightened gasp, clutching his chest right over his heart. "Oh, my Lord," Isaiah whispered, his voice shaking violently. "Not my Kendra. She does not know anything about commercial markets. She is a consultant. She just works her quiet job. How could the federal government come after my little girl? Because we filed jointly," Marcus explained quickly, leaning forward and pointing at the thick stack of papers. "The debt is massive, Isaiah. The federal agents are demanding $500,000 in immediate liquid cash, or they are going to issue a federal arrest warrant for Kendra by tomorrow morning." Isaiah leaned forward, squinting his eyes hard, pretending he could barely read the bold black ink on the front page. $500,000, Isaiah repeated, letting a deep, heavy sigh escape his lungs. "Marcus, I am just a retired man. I live on a fixed pension and my social security checks. I do not have $500,000 hidden under my mattress. If I sell this house, maybe I can give you $100,000, but the bank owns most of it." Marcus felt a dark, thrilling rush of adrenaline. The old man was completely buying the lie, hook, line, and sinker. "I know you do not have the cash," Isaiah Marcus said, keeping his tone incredibly sympathetic, masking his total sociopathic greed. "But you have excellent, completely unblemished credit built over 50 years of hard work. I can use your clean financial standing as a heavy federal shield to completely absorb the tax penalty." "What do you mean?" Isaiah asked, his hands shaking even harder as he reached out to touch the edge of the legal document. "I do not understand banking, Marcus. I just pay my light bill and I buy my groceries. I cannot fight the federal government." "You do not have to fight them," Marcus lied flawlessly, sliding the heavy stack of papers closer to the old man. "My emergency tax lawyers drafted this corporate liability waiver. It is a massive, complex federal loophole. If you sign this document, it temporarily transfers the entire tax burden off of Kendra and places it into a blind federal holding trust under your name. But I cannot pay it either." Isaiah cried, his voice pitching higher in pure manufactured panic. "If they put the debt on me, they will take my house. They will throw me out on the street. No, they will not." Marcus promised, placing his hand over Isaiah. trembling fingers, an act of completely fake reassurance. Because you are a senior citizen living on a fixed income, the federal government cannot legally collect a penalty this large from you. The debt will immediately go into a prolonged 10-year administrative review. It buys me all the time I need to liquidate my commercial assets and pay off the fine myself. Isaiah looked down at the 50 pages of dense, confusing legal jargon. He knew exactly what was buried in the middle of that document. He knew the corrupt lawyer had hidden a complete, irrevocable power of attorney transfer designed to steal the Vanguard Legacy Trust. He knew Marcus was trying to declare him legally senile to seize control of a fortune Kendra did not even know existed. Isaiah looked back up at Marcus, his dark eyes filled with fake tears and entirely genuine disgust. "Are you absolutely sure this will save Kendra?" Isaiah asked, his voice a fragile, broken whisper. "Will this keep the police away from her door?" "I swear on my own life," Marcus said, completely unaware he had just sworn an oath to a ghost. "If you sign these papers, Kendra is completely safe and the federal agents walk away forever. But we have to do it right now, Isaiah. The deadline is tomorrow morning, and the banks need to process the waiver tonight." Isaiah let out a long, heavy breath, staring at the thick document, playing the helpless prey to absolute perfection. He slowly nodded his head, surrendering to the lies and letting the massive trap fall into place. Isaiah reached out with a trembling hand and pulled the heavy stack of legal papers closer to him on the faded coffee table. But Marcus, Isaiah asked, his voice pitching up into a frail, uncertain whine. "If I sign this massive federal waiver, does it mean I have to go to a courtroom?" "I do not have a good suit for a federal courtroom, and I do not want to stand in front of an angry judge." Marcus felt a massive, intoxicating wave of pure superiority wash over his panicked mind. He looked at the pathetic old man worrying about a cheap suit while $500,000 was sitting right on the table. "You do not have to go anywhere near a courtroom," Isaiah Marcus promised smoothly, flashing his bright, rehearsed smile. "My elite legal team handles everything in the shadows. You just stay right here in your comfortable house and let me do all the heavy lifting." Isaiah slowly turned the thick, crisp pages, his calloused fingers fumbling deliberately with the corners. "Why are there so many words?" Marcus Isaiah questioned, squinting down at the complex paragraphs. "Back in my day, a man just gave his word and a simple handshake was a binding contract. This looks like it was written in a completely different language." "It is just standard federal bureaucracy," Marcus explained. Leaning back slightly on the floral sofa, feeling his terrifying deadline finally lifting. The government has to use 1,000 confusing words just to justify their own massive salaries. You do not need to read the fine print, Isaiah. It is all just standard, highly repetitive tax jargon designed to bore you to death. Isaiah stopped turning the pages, his trembling finger pausing right in the middle of the heavy document. He looked specifically at page 25, the exact page where Arthur Sterling had buried the irrevocable conservatorship clause. "But what does this specific part mean?" Marcus Isaiah asked, leaning closer to the paper as if his eyesight was failing him. "It says something here about a full power of attorney and a complete transfer of all administrative rights. Does that mean you are going to be my lawyer now?" Marcus felt his heart skip a massive, terrifying beat. He held his breath, praying the old man was too simple to understand the devastating legal trap hidden in those specific words. "It is merely a temporary administrative measure," Isaiah Marcus lied, his voice remaining calm and incredibly steady. "Because I am the one aggressively negotiating with the severe federal agents, I need a temporary authorization to speak on your behalf. It just stops the aggressive IRS collectors from knocking on your front door and harassing you for the massive penalty money." Isaiah looked up from the forged document, his dark eyes wide, projecting a perfect, absolute gullibility. "You are a very smart boy, Marcus," Isaiah said, letting a heavy, relieved sigh escape his chest. "Kendra always told me that you knew exactly how to handle massive corporate business." "I'm just a simple, retired man. I do not understand complex estates or massive corporate trusts or any of this confusing modern banking. Marcus could barely contain the dark, greedy smirk trying to break across his face. The old man was completely clueless. Isaiah had just openly admitted that he did not understand his own massive fortune. The Vanguard Legacy Trust was absolutely ripe for the taking, and the billionaire guardian was practically handing over the keys to the entire kingdom. I know you do not understand it, Isaiah Marcus said, keeping his tone dripping with fake condescending sympathy. That is exactly why Kendra married me. I am here to protect this family from the aggressive predators in the financial world. I completely shield her from the stress, and I will gladly shield you too. You just have to trust me and let me execute this massive legal maneuver. Isaiah nodded his head slowly, fully committing to the performance of the helpless, trusting father. I do trust you, Marcus. Isaiah whispered, his voice thick with fake emotion. I know you deeply love my daughter, and I know you would never do anything to put our small family in severe danger. Marcus felt a massive rush of pure, unadulterated evil. He was just minutes away from stealing $500,000, saving his own life from the violent street enforcers, and seizing absolute control of a massive hidden empire. He had completely outsmarted a billionaire by preying on the simple love of a father. He reached into the inner pocket of his ruined designer suit jacket and pulled out a heavy, expensive silver pen. The trap was fully closed, and the old man was ready to bleed. Marcus held out the heavy silver pen, his hand remarkably steady despite the massive adrenaline rushing through his veins. Here you go, Isaiah, Marcus whispered, his voice dripping with completely fake empathy. Just sign your name on the bottom line right next to the blue notary stamp, and I will make this entire federal nightmare disappear for Kendra. Isaiah looked at the shiny silver pen lying on top of the dense legal document. He let out a long, heavy breath, a perfect simulation of total crushing defeat. He slowly reached out, his calloused fingers trembling violently, and picked up the expensive writing instrument. It felt entirely too heavy in his weathered hand, exactly the way a simple man would react to an intimidating piece of luxury. Marcus leaned forward on the faded floral sofa, barely able to contain the massive, greedy smirk pulling at the corners of his mouth. He watched the old man, completely oblivious to the fact that he was signing away a multi-million-dollar fortune. Marcus felt like an absolute genius, a criminal mastermind, outsmarting a billionaire who was too senile to protect his own daughter. He had completely bypassed the corporate lawyers, using nothing but raw emotional manipulation. Isaiah brought the tip of the pen down to the thick paper. He paused for a single agonizing second, letting Marcus sweat just a little bit more. As he hesitated, Isaiah subtly shifted his eyes toward the small, dusty bookshelf in the corner of the dim living room. Sitting perfectly still on the top shelf next to a stack of old encyclopedias was a vintage wooden clock. It was completely identical to the one he had hand-carved and presented to Marcus at the disastrous anniversary dinner. But this specific wooden clock had a microscopic high-definition camera lens perfectly embedded inside the number 12. It was recording every single whisper, every single lie, and every single bead of sweat rolling down Marcus' face. Another camera, disguised as a standard smoke detector on the ceiling, captured the forged document sitting on the coffee table. The video feed was currently streaming in real time directly to the massive corporate servers at Vance Global Holdings. Detective Andre Vance and a team of elite corporate attorneys were watching the entire performance, quietly documenting the massive federal felony. Isaiah looked back down at the document, entirely satisfied the trap was fully operational. I am doing this for my little girl, Isaiah said, his voice cracking with a perfect manufactured sorrow. You tell the federal government they leave my Kendra alone and they never bother her again. I promise you, Isaiah. Marcus replied, his eyes locked hungrily on the silver pen. She will never spend a single second in a courtroom. Just sign the paper and let me save our family. Isaiah pressed the silver tip to the paper and slowly, deliberately dragged the ink across the signature line. He wrote his name with a shaky, jagged script perfectly mimicking the handwriting of an elderly, terrified man. He signed the first page, and then Marcus quickly flipped to the second signature line, his greedy fingers completely unable to wait. "Just one more right here," Marcus instructed, his breathing growing shallow and rapid, anticipating his massive victory. "This just authorizes the full legal transfer, so I can speak to the judges directly." Isaiah signed the second page, the scratch of the pen echoing loudly in the quiet brick house. He completed the final loop of his last name and slowly lifted the pen from the paper. Before Isaiah could even set the expensive pen down, Marcus practically snatched the thick legal document off the faded coffee table. Marcus stared at the two jagged signatures resting directly next to the official blue notary stamp. The paper was legally binding. The conservatorship was entirely active. He had the absolute unchecked power to liquidate the Vanguard Legacy Trust and strip the old man of every single penny. He had $500,000 for the syndicate enforcers, and millions more for himself to restart his fake empire. "Thank you, Isaiah," Marcus said, completely dropping the terrified, panicked tone, his voice suddenly sharp and incredibly cold. "You made the absolute right choice today. I will take this straight to the Federal Administrative Office and process the liability waiver." Marcus stood up quickly, not bothering to help the frail old man out of his chair. He shoved the forged document into his thick leather folder, his chest swelling with massive, unadulterated arrogance. He turned his back on Isaiah, entirely dismissing the man he just robbed, and walked briskly toward the front door. He had won the war, he had beaten the quiet billionaire, and he was walking out with the keys to the kingdom. Marcus walked out of the modest brick house, the heavy wooden door closing behind him with a soft, satisfying click. He stepped off the simple wooden porch, and the warm Atlanta sun hit his face, feeling like an absolute spotlight of pure victory. He took a deep, arrogant breath, filling his lungs with the sweet air of total triumph. He had actually done it. He had walked into the lion's den, and he had completely stolen the king's crown without spilling a single drop of blood. He strode down the concrete path, his posture completely transformed from the weeping, desperate coward of 10 minutes ago. He practically strutted toward his leased black sedan parked down the quiet street. His ruined designer suit suddenly feeling like the robes of a conquering emperor. He clutched the thick leather folder to his chest, feeling the heavy forged legal document inside practically humming with millions of dollars of raw stolen power. Marcus slid into the driver's seat of his car, slamming the door shut and instantly locking out the quiet, working-class neighborhood. He tossed the leather folder onto the passenger seat, staring at it with hungry, obsessive eyes. The two jagged signatures on that paper were his golden ticket to absolute freedom. He was no longer a drowning man suffocating under a mountain of underground debt. He was the legal guardian of the Vanguard Legacy Trust, a massive financial fortress that he was about to completely dismantle and drain dry. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his sleek smartphone, his hands no longer shaking with terror. His fingers were completely steady as he scrolled through his encrypted contact list, completely ignoring the missed calls from his weeping wife. He did not care about Kendra anymore, and he certainly did not care about her manufactured tax evasion panic. She had served her purpose perfectly, acting as the ultimate emotional leverage to break the stubborn old man. Marcus found the untraceable number for the massive, scarred enforcer from the parking garage. He pressed dial, leaning back in his leather seat, a smug, venomous smile spreading across his face. The line rang twice before the heavy, gravelly voice of Silas answered the call. "You better be calling to tell me you have my money." Silas growled, the threat of absolute violence lingering just beneath the surface of his cold voice. "You have less than 24 hours left, Marcus." "I'm calling to tell you to prepare a very large duffel bag," Marcus said, his voice dripping with his old, completely toxic arrogance. He felt untouchable, holding the legal keys to a billionaire estate. The panic was completely gone, replaced by a reckless, manic confidence. "I secured the capital, Silas. I have $500,000 in guaranteed completely liquid assets, and I am processing the massive withdrawal in the morning." There was a brief, heavy silence on the other end of the line. Silas was not a man who appreciated arrogant games, and he did not easily believe desperate gamblers. "I do not want to hear about processed assets," Silas warned, his voice dropping into a dark, lethal register. "I want cold, hard cash in my hands by Saturday night. If you show up with a piece of paper or a bounced cashier check, I'm going to rip your jaw completely off your face. You will have your cash by tomorrow afternoon." Marcus promised smoothly, entirely unbothered by the graphic threat. "In fact, Silas, tell the boss I'm going to throw in an extra $50,000 just to compensate him for the slight delay. I told you, gentlemen, I'm a massive player in this city. I just had to restructure a massive corporate trust to free up the liquid capital. The money is legally mine now, and the banks have to obey my direct legal commands. Just have the money," Marcus, Silas said, coldly, completely unimpressed by the corporate bragging. "We will text you the exact drop location tomorrow at noon. Do not be late, and do not come with any stupid excuses." The line went completely dead, a sharp click echoing in the quiet car. Marcus tossed the phone onto the center console, letting out a loud, hysterical laugh that bounced off the windows of the leased sedan. He had bought his life back, and he had completely turned the tables on everyone who had ever doubted him. He started the engine, the car roaring to life, matching the massive, thundering ego expanding in his chest. He pulled away from the curb, looking at the small brick house in his rearview mirror one final time. He imagined Isaiah sitting in that dim living room, completely clueless, thinking he had just saved his daughter from federal prison. The old man was an absolute fool and a complete pathetic failure as a billionaire. Marcus drove toward the highway, his mind spinning with massive, incredibly greedy plans for the future. As soon as he paid off the violent street syndicate, he was going to march straight into a massive corporate bank. He was going to use the forged power of attorney to completely drain the Vanguard Legacy Trust, funneling millions of dollars into untouchable offshore accounts. Then he was going to serve Kendra with immediate divorce papers, leaving her completely penniless and absolutely devastated. He would buy a new massive mansion in Buckhead, buy Chloe a diamond necklace twice the size of the last one, and finally take his rightful place as a true, undisputed king of the city. He drove faster, chasing his dark, stolen horizon, completely blind to the massive, inescapable trap that had already snapped shut around his neck. The sound of the leased sedan engine faded down the quiet street. Isaiah stood completely still in the center of the dim living room. He listened to the silence, making absolutely sure the arrogant thief was completely gone. Then a remarkable physical transformation took place. The frantic trembling in his calloused hands stopped instantly. The fragile, hunched posture of a terrified old man completely vanished. Isaiah straightened his back, his broad shoulders expanding, filling the small room with an undeniable, massive authority. He was no longer a helpless victim. He was a billionaire apex predator, and he had just caught his desperate prey. Isaiah walked over to the small, dusty bookshelf in the corner of the room. He picked up the vintage wooden clock, the exact replica of the one Marcus had mocked at the disastrous anniversary dinner. He looked directly into the microscopic camera lens, hidden perfectly inside the number 12. "Do you have all of it?" Isaiah asked the quiet room, his voice returning to its normal, deep, commanding rumble. He reached into the pocket of his faded denim jeans and pulled out his heavy, encrypted satellite phone. He dialed the secure line directly to the penthouse command center. The phone rang only once before the connection locked in. "We have every single second of it, Mr. Vance." "Detective Andre," Vance answered immediately, his voice completely crisp and highly professional. The audio is crystal clear, and the high-definition video feed captured the forged document perfectly. "We have him on tape executing a massive federal felony and explicitly lying about an IRS audit to aggressively extort a senior citizen." Isaiah walked over to the faded floral sofa, looking at the empty space on the coffee table where the forged power of attorney had rested just moments ago. He took the bait exactly as predicted. Isaiah said, his dark eyes burning with a cold, strategic fire. He believes he just outsmarted me, and he truly believes he completely controls the Vanguard Legacy Trust. He is blinded by his own toxic ego. Isaiah continued, taking a slow, deep breath. He looked at a quiet old man, and he only saw a convenient weakness. He never stopped to ask himself why a man with a massive corporate trust would live in a small brick house on the south side. His greed completely erased his common sense. We also tracked his GPS to a disgraced attorney named Arthur Sterling. Andre reported feeding more vital intelligence over the secure line. We already seized the illegal notary logs from the strip mall office. We have enough hard evidence to disbar Sterling by tomorrow and send him to federal prison for a decade. The entire criminal conspiracy is perfectly documented from the top to the bottom. He is going to move very fast, Sir Andre warned, the sound of rapid typing echoing over the secure line. The street syndicate gave him a hard, violent deadline for Saturday night. He has to liquidate that massive trust fund tomorrow, or the enforcers will break his legs. He's going to call our primary financial institution and demand an emergency boardroom meeting to officially execute his fake conservatorship. Let him call them, Isaiah, commanded, his voice as cold and sharp as cracked ice. Contact the chief executive officer of our primary commercial bank. Instruct him to accept Marcus' phone call and completely agree to the emergency meeting tomorrow morning. Tell the bank manager to roll out the red carpet for him. I want Marcus to feel like an absolute king, right up until the exact moment we cut off his head. Understood, Sir Andre, replied a dark satisfaction evident in his professional tone. What about your daughter? Marcus is going to need Kendra at that formal meeting to publicly validate the transfer of power and play the role of the helpless wife. Isaiah felt a brief, heavy pang of genuine sorrow in his chest. Kendra had suffered enough under this monster, but she needed to see the absolute truth with her own two eyes. She needed to witness the total, humiliating destruction of the fake empire so she could finally break free from her abusive husband. Marcus will drag her there. Isaiah predicted, his jaw clenching tightly with protective fury. He will tell her it is a mandatory tax meeting or some other desperate, manipulative lie to get her into that corporate boardroom. Make sure your elite security team is tracking their vehicle every single second of the day. If he lays a single violent hand on my daughter, you do not wait for the meeting. You take him down immediately. My men are already sitting outside their mansion, Mr. Vance Andre assured him quickly. She is completely safe, and we have a heavy perimeter established. Isaiah walked to the front window, pulling back the simple curtain and looking out at the peaceful working-class street. The trap was perfectly set, the criminal evidence was completely locked in a digital vault, and the final stage was fully prepared. Assemble the elite legal team. Isaiah ordered, his voice echoing with absolute, undeniable power. Tell the lead corporate litigator to prepare the final execution documents. Tomorrow morning we are not just going to stop a robbery. We are going to publicly dismantle Marcus in front of the bank executives, in front of my daughter, and in front of the entire world. It will be an absolute bloodbath, Sir Andre said, a grim, loyal promise in his heavy voice. Isaiah ended the call, slipping the heavy satellite phone back into his pocket. He looked around the modest decoy house, the quiet stoige, where he had just delivered the greatest performance of his life. Marcus thought he had stolen a massive fortune using a cheap forged document and a fake emotional smile. But Marcus had absolutely no idea that he had just signed his own permanent death warrant. The arrogant thief had walked right into a titanium cage, and Isaiah had just swallowed the only key. The morning sun pierced the heavy curtains of the massive suburban mansion. Marcus stood in front of the full-length mirror, adjusting the collar of his backup designer suit. His primary suit was ruined, but stained with the oil from the parking garage floor, but his confidence was completely restored. He checked his reflection, flashing a sharp, predatory smile. He had the forged document resting securely in his leather briefcase. He had the absolute power to erase his massive syndicate debt and walk away a millionaire. "Get dressed right now," Marcus ordered, his voice cold and commanding. "Put on something expensive, Kendra. We have a massive mandatory meeting with the federal tax mediators in exactly 1 hour." Kendra looked up, her face pale with confusion and deep fear. "What mediators?" Kendra asked, her voice trembling slightly. "You told me the accounts were frozen because of a corporate glitch. Why are we meeting about taxes?" "Because I fixed it," Marcus snapped, grabbing a heavy diamond necklace from her vanity and tossing it onto her lap. "I spent the entire night negotiating with aggressive federal agents, and I managed to secure a massive corporate liability waiver. I am saving you from federal prison, Kendra. You just need to sit in the boardroom, look like a grateful wife, and keep your mouth completely shut." Kendra felt a cold knot of dread forming in her stomach. She did not understand the sudden shift in his demeanor. Yesterday he was screaming about liquidity, and today he was acting like a conquering king. She slowly stood up, too terrified to ask any more questions. She put on a tailored black dress, moving like a numb, broken sleepwalker, entirely under his cruel control. An hour later, Marcus drove his leased sedan, pulling up to a towering glass skyscraper in the center of the financial district. It was the primary headquarters for the largest commercial bank in Atlanta. This was not a standard retail branch. This was the fortress where elite billionaires and massive international corporations stored their liquid wealth. Marcus tossed the keys to the terrified valet, grabbing Kendra by the arm with a tight, painful grip. "Smile," Marcus hissed in her ear, leading her through the massive, revolving glass doors. "You are about to watch your husband conquer the entire financial world." They stepped into the sprawling marble lobby. The air was cool, smelling of expensive leather and polished stone. Marcus marched directly to the front security desk, slapping his thick leather briefcase down on the granite counter. "I am Marcus Dive," he announced loudly, ensuring the passing executives heard his arrogant voice. "I have an emergency high-priority boardroom meeting with the Chief Executive Officer of the Trust Division. I am here to execute a complete, irrevocable power of attorney transfer for the Vanguard Legacy Trust." The security guard did not ask for identification. He simply nodded, acting on strict secret orders handed down directly from the penthouse. "Right this way, sir," the guard said, pressing a silent button under the desk. "The executive elevator is waiting for you." Marcus grabbed Kendra's arm again, pulling her toward the polished steel doors. He felt like an absolute god walking through the halls of immense wealth, completely confident that the bank executives were bowing to his forged authority. The elevator shot up to the 50th floor, opening into a massive, silent reception area. A senior bank manager wearing a pristine, tailored suit stood waiting for them. He offered a tight, professional smile, playing his assigned role flawlessly. "Good morning, Marcus," the manager said, gesturing toward a set of heavy, frosted glass doors. "The main boardroom is fully prepared for your transaction." Marcus did not say thank you. He just pushed past the manager, dragging his bewildered wife into the massive room. The boardroom was intimidating, featuring a long mahogany table surrounded by plush leather chairs. Massive, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a staggering view of the entire city skyline. 3 senior banking executives sat at the far end of the table, their faces completely blank, waiting for the thief to present his stolen prize. "Take a seat," Kendra Marcus commanded, pushing her into a chair near the door. He walked to the head of the massive table, standing tall, projecting absolute, undeniable dominance. He opened his leather briefcase with a sharp, dramatic snap. "Gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice echoing loudly off the glass walls, "we are going to make this very quick. My father-in-law, Isaiah Vance, has suffered a severe, catastrophic cognitive decline. He is completely senile and entirely incapable of managing his massive estate." To prevent absolute financial ruin, he has legally surrendered all administrative control directly to me. Marcus pulled the thick, forged liability waiver from his briefcase. He slid it aggressively down the long mahogany table. It stopped directly in front of the lead bank executive. That document contains a legally binding, irrevocable conservatorship clause, Marcus declared, pointing a firm finger at the thick stack of paper. It is fully signed by Isaiah Vance and officially stamped by a licensed notary. I am now the sole legal guardian of the Vanguard Legacy Trust. I am instructing you to immediately liquidate $5 million and transfer the liquid cash into my primary offshore corporate account. Kendra gasped loudly, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. She stared at her husband, her mind completely unable to process the horrific words. My father, Kendra, whispered, her voice shaking violently in the quiet boardroom. What are you talking about, Marcus? My father is not senile. He does not have a massive corporate trust. He lives in a small brick house. I told you to keep your mouth shut, Marcus snapped, turning his cold, venomous eyes on his terrified wife. You do not know anything about his real money, Kendra. He hid a massive fortune from you while you were struggling to pay for groceries, but I found it, and now I am taking complete control of it to save our family. Kendra felt the room spinning rapidly around her. She looked at the heavy document on the table, recognizing the name Vanguard Legacy Trust from the bold black ink on the front page. She realized with absolute crushing horror that her husband was attempting a massive, devastating robbery. The lead bank executive picked up the forged document. He adjusted his expensive glasses, turning the pages slowly, pretending to read the complex legal jargon. He looked at the jagged signatures and the official blue notary stamp. This appears to be a complete transfer of power, the executive said, keeping his voice completely flat, revealing absolutely no emotion. You are demanding an immediate unverified liquidation of $5 million based solely on this single document. I'm not demanding anything. Marcus sneered, leaning forward, resting his hands flat on the expensive mahogany table. I am giving you a direct, legally binding order. I am the absolute king of this trust now. Process the massive wire transfer right now, or I will sue this entire bank into total bankruptcy. The boardroom fell completely silent. Marcus stood at the head of the table, breathing heavily, completely intoxicated by his own fake power. He was fully convinced that he had just conquered the billionaire empire and completely erased his deadly syndicate debt. He did not hear the heavy frosted glass doors slowly unlatching behind him. Marcus doubled down on his vicious lies, trying to force the bankers into immediate compliance. Look at the signatures, Marcus demanded, pointing a rigid, shaking finger at the forged paper. The man could barely hold the pen. He is a massive danger to himself and an absolute liability to this financial institution. He lives in a deteriorating brick house, completely detached from reality, hoarding wealth, while his own daughter struggles to pay basic bills. I'm stepping in as a responsible guardian to prevent a total catastrophic financial collapse of this estate. Kendra cried out from her chair by the door. You are a terrible liar, Marcus, she sobbed, her voice echoing in the large room. My father is completely fine. He is not senile. Marcus turned on her with absolute fury. Shut up, Kendra. He barked, his voice sharp and incredibly cruel. You are just as clueless as he is. You did not even know this massive fortune existed. I am the only one with the aggressive financial genius to protect this legacy from severe federal taxation. He is entirely unfit, and the law has rightfully stripped him of his power. The lead bank executive did not touch his computer keyboard, and he did not authorize a single wire transfer. He simply looked over Marcus' shoulder, his face completely blank, waiting for the final act to begin. The heavy, frosted glass doors swung open with a loud, absolute crash. Marcus spun around, ready to scream at whatever pathetic security guard dared to interrupt his massive coronation. But the angry words completely died in his throat, choking him with sudden, paralyzing fear. Isaiah walked into the massive boardroom. He was not wearing a faded plaid shirt, and he was not hunched over like a frail, terrified old man. He wore a flawless midnight blue bespoke suit radiating an absolute terrifying authority. He walked with long, powerful strides, his dark eyes fixed entirely on the arrogant thief standing at the head of the table. Behind Isaiah, a team of 4 elite corporate litigators wearing sharp gray suits marched confidently into the room. Detective Andre Vance flanked them, his massive physical presence an undeniable threat of absolute control. Marcus took a sudden, panicked step backward, his legs hitting the edge of the heavy mahogany table. He stared at the old man, his mind completely unable to process the impossible, terrifying sight. "Isaiah!" Marcus gasped, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched squeak. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be at home." Isaiah completely ignored the trembling coward. He walked directly to Kendra, who was staring at him with wide, completely shocked eyes. He placed a gentle, deeply reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Do not cry anymore, sweetheart," Isaiah said, his voice deep and completely steady. "The long nightmare is officially over today." Kendra looked at his expensive tailored suit and the massive army of elite lawyers standing directly behind him. "Dad," she whispered, her voice full of absolute, undeniable confusion. "What is happening? What is this place?" "I am protecting our family," Isaiah told her gently. "I am protecting you from him." Isaiah turned his cold, highly calculating gaze back to Marcus. Marcus was gripping the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles completely white, sweating profusely under the harsh, bright boardroom lights. "You are interrupting a confidential, highly sensitive legal proceeding," Marcus shouted, his voice cracking violently in pure, unadulterated panic. "I have the signed federal document. I have the absolute power of attorney. Security, remove this man immediately. He is medically unfit to be in this building." The bank executives did not move a single muscle. They simply sat back in their plush leather chairs, completely silent, watching the true billionaire king reclaim his stolen throne. The lead corporate litigator, a tall woman with piercing green eyes, stepped forward. She dropped a massive, thick leather binder onto the polished mahogany table right next to Marcus' cheap forged document. "You do not have a power of attorney," the lead lawyer stated, her voice cutting through the quiet room like a perfectly sharpened blade. "You have a completely fraudulent piece of paper drafted by a suspended, highly corrupt attorney whom federal agents arrested exactly 20 minutes ago." Marcus felt the blood completely drain from his face, leaving him pale and incredibly dizzy. He looked at the massive legal binder and then back at Isaiah. Arthur Sterling was arrested. Marcus whispered, his entire dark criminal scheme collapsing instantly around him. "Yes, he was," Isaiah said, taking a slow, deliberate step toward the head of the long table. "And he immediately confessed to the entire criminal conspiracy to save his own pathetic life from a maximum prison sentence. He provided the federal agents with all your encrypted text messages, all your burner phone records, and the exact digital metadata from the forged document you tried to use to rob my family." "It is a lie," Marcus screamed, completely losing his mind in the face of absolute terrifying ruin. "I have the signatures right here. I have the official blue notary stamp. You signed it voluntarily, Isaiah. You gave me the trust. You admitted you were completely incompetent." Isaiah reached into his tailored suit pocket and pulled out the small vintage wooden clock. He set it down gently on the polished mahogany table, the hidden microscopic camera lens pointing directly at Marcus' terrified, sweating face. "I did not sign a federal liability waiver," Isaiah corrected, his voice echoing with massive, undeniable power. "I signed a piece of paper under aggressive, highly documented criminal duress. I recorded you, Marcus, in high-definition video and crystal-clear audio. I recorded you completely lying about a federal IRS audit. I recorded you attempting to extort a senior citizen by actively threatening my only daughter with federal prison." Marcus stared at the small wooden clock, the exact same craft project he had brutally mocked at the expensive anniversary dinner. The realization hit him like a massive speeding freight train. He had not outsmarted a senile old man. He had walked blindly, fueled by his own massive ego, into a highly sophisticated multi-million-dollar trap. The corporate lawyer opened the thick leather binder, unleashing the complete devastating domino chain of hard evidence. Furthermore, she announced to the completely silent boardroom, the Vanguard Legacy Trust is an irrevocable generation-skipping trust. By strict, undeniable legal definition, it cannot be transferred, altered, or liquidated by a simple power of attorney. Your forged document is completely useless, legally invalid, and constitutes a massive, undeniable act of first-degree felony fraud. Marcus' legs completely gave out. He collapsed heavily into the leather chair behind him, his breathing shallow and incredibly rapid, his dark eyes darting frantically around the room, desperately looking for an exit that absolutely did not exist. Isaiah moved closer to the head of the heavy mahogany table, standing directly over the trembling, pathetic shell of a man. He did not look like a frail, retired worker anymore. He looked like the absolute, undeniable king of a massive financial empire, and he was staring down at a desperate, cornered rat. Marcus tried to sink deeper into the plush leather chair, his chest heaving, rapidly, sweat pouring down his pale face. The arrogant swagger, the loud boasting, and the expensive silk suits were completely stripped away, leaving nothing but pure, unadulterated cowardice. "You called me a failure, Marcus," Isaiah said, his deep voice echoing with absolute crushing finality in the silent boardroom. "You stood in an expensive restaurant waving a black credit card that I secretly guaranteed, and you humiliated me in front of my own daughter. You thought my silence was a sign of weakness. You thought my faded charcoal suit meant I was a pathetic old man, completely ripe for the taking. But you did not realize that true power does not need to shout, and true wealth does not need to show off." Isaiah turned his gaze to Kendra, his eyes softening just a fraction as he looked at his devastated, weeping daughter. "I'm so sorry you have to see this, sweetheart," Isaiah told her gently, pulling a thick manila envelope from his tailored suit jacket. "But you need to know exactly who you married, and you need to see exactly what he did in the dark. He did not just lie to me, Kendra. He has been systematically and aggressively stealing from you for months." Isaiah opened the heavy envelope and pulled out a stack of high-resolution photographs and certified bank statements. He tossed them onto the polished mahogany table, letting them scatter directly in front of Kendra and the three silent bank executives. "Look at the pictures," Kendra Isaiah instructed, his voice thick with protective fury. "Look at the young woman in the designer dress wearing a custom diamond tennis bracelet. Her name is Chloe. She is 24 years old, and your husband has been fully funding her entire luxury lifestyle for the past 8 months." Kendra slowly leaned forward, her hands shaking violently as she picked up a glossy photograph. She saw Marcus smiling, a massive, genuine smile, wrapping his arm tightly around the young fitness instructor. She saw the expensive jewelry box in his hand. A sharp, agonizing sob ripped through her chest, her tears falling freely onto the heavy paper. "Now look at the bank statements," Isaiah commanded, his voice growing louder, filling the massive room with inescapable truth. "2 days ago, you transferred $25,000 from your private savings account, desperately trying to save his sick, elderly mother. But Ms. Ruby never saw a single penny of that money, Kendra. She is living in a dilapidated apartment, completely abandoned by her own son.